Well, we know how important it is to get the basics right in our fishing, certainly in feeder fishing. I talk about it all the time, just being able to cast accurately, be able to hit your clip, and just read the signs and things about what's happening around you. It's all very, very important. But there are other things that are very important as well, and these are the things that a lot of the top anglers work on behind closed doors, behind the scenes. Now, during the UK lockdown, I, like lots of other people, had a little bit of extra time on our hands when we couldn't go out. So that obviously limited a lot of the activities that we could actually partake in, and one of them was to look at a lot of the hooks that I was carrying, the hook patterns, just the way that I stored my hook lengths. And the other thing, which is something that I've never really had time to spend much time on, is hair rigs. Now, hair rigs, I'll openly say to you, I'll be absolutely honest with you, and you all know this, that there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of videos out there on YouTube and on other platforms that show you how to tie hook lengths or how to tie hair rigs. Alright, now in another video I'll probably go over the occasions when we would use, or when I would decide to use a hair rig, and the situations when I see some of the top anglers switching to hair rigs over having a bait presented on the hook normally. But this video is just to kind of clarify the type of hair rigs that I'm using. Now, through the lockdown period, I was able to experiment with lots of different hook patterns, lots of different knots, lots of different ways of tying hair rigs, and I'm obviously quite privileged to share information and be part of a circle of anglers that are some of the best in the world at fishing with a method feeder. When I say method feeder, I know that is a discipline on its own, but hair rigging is largely attached to method feeder fishing. However, there are occasions, which I will cover in another video, when we are using hair rigs now on natural venues. Some lads use them on rivers, some certainly on bream fishing situations we use hair rigs in certain conditions. So when I'm talking about hair rigs, I by no means mean this to be specifically targeted at commercial fishery anglers or carp anglers. We're using them all over the place now, certainly a lot of bream fishing as well. So what I want to do is I just want to show you how I tie my hook lengths. Okay, now I've got a camera set up just here for you, alright, and I'm hoping that's going to capture everything for you. What I'm going to do is, firstly, I've just got to say there are loads of different ways of tying hair rigs, alright, and there's loads of ways, and a lot of you will already have your own ways of doing it. Now, I'm a big believer in keeping things simple. That's the one thing. Being able to tie hook lengths yourself, they've got to be, it hasn't got to be too much of a chore, otherwise you're not going to want to do it. I'm like that. If something's a chore, you're going to be less likely to want to do it. And the other thing is they've got to be durable, and that's one of the key issues. Now, the reason why I brought that up is because, you know, usually when we're hair rigging, we're after better sized fish, and they're the ones that test your kit. And a hair rig's got to be right, because more often than not, the hair rig is actually doing the hooking of the fish for you. Okay, so it's not about you hitting bites like you normally hit bites. A lot of it is about having a hair rig that's going to do the work for you, so that when the fish sucks the bait in, when it goes to eject that bait or tries to filter it, the hook is going to pull into the fish's mouth, and that is going to hook itself. Alright, now one of the best tips I can give you is, if you're not sure about all this sort of thing, or you do want to look into it more, then one of the things I did this, and this book must be probably 8 years old. Okay, now that is a book that I don't even know if it's still available. I'm sure it will be. I'll put it on that camera for you so you can see what it's called. It's called The Ultimate Rig Guide, and it is aimed at carp anglers or carp angling. Okay, it was only about £9, The Ultimate Rig Guide. It was only about £9 to buy, and that just covers lots and lots of different rigs. Alright, and more importantly, it tells you why certain rigs work. Alright, because, you know, from looking at a book like this, a lot of this information will all be online anyway, in videos, I'm sure by now. But this is about 8 years old, this book. I don't even know who wrote it. It's saying it's a carpology publication. Nothing to do with me. Alright, but that was the one that I picked, and that's where I started looking at rigs. So, I'm going to show you the hair rig, or a typical hair rig that I'm using now, and while I'm doing it, I'm going to tell you why I do certain things a certain way. Alright, now firstly, just to let you know, I'm using a nice hook. I mean, these are size 10s. It's a thick gauge hook, because obviously I'm doing this for camera purposes, for filming purposes. These are the MX C4 hooks, extra strong. It's just thick gauge, it's going to show up on the camera better for you. But these are the ones that I use when we're after really big fish and stuff, alright? So the line that I'm using is a Maxima line. I don't pick that because it's Maxima, I picked it because it's red and it's just a nice colour to use for when I'm filming. Alright, and I'm going to slow this down a little bit because I've got autofocus set on here, so as I'm doing things I'm going to give the camera time to just kind of focus in on the close-ups so that you can have a nice sharp image. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I get my bits out. I use this little tool here for tying the little loops with. Okay, it's got a PI on there for Preston, but I'm sure there's loads out there. So that's the tool that I use for the loop, and I'll show you what that's for in a moment. I've got a nice little bayonet, okay, that we use for boilies. Loads on the market. These are ours, these are the ones that I use. I just think that they work fine. Okay, so I'm going to do a bayonet on here. There's lots of different ways. You can put bands on hairs, you could put a speed stop, anything like that, but the principle is the same, and I'll show you how and why I do it. Okay, so what I do is I get a nice length of line. Okay, and the first thing I want to do is put the bayonet into a loop. Okay, and what I do is basically I thread the bayonet on like that through the loop. Okay, and what I do then is tie that into its own loop, just an overhand loop. I only do it once, I find once is enough. A nice overhand loop. Okay, now I've never done this with such a thick gauge line as this, or a stiff line like this, so I'm hoping this is going to be alright for you. So as you can see, that's a loop, but don't close the loop up. Okay, because what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that that bayonet there, let the camera focuses for you, that bayonet is going to be free to move in that loop. That's the key to it, because when we're fishing with wafters you want the bait to be moving around, or you want it to be free. You don't want it to be on a stiff line so it's going to lay stiff. Alright, so what I do is I do that overhand loop so it's in that state, and all I do then is I get this little tool here, and I always use it on the 8 setting. I think that means 8mm, and what I do is I thread through there, and then the lower loop goes through the shorter stem. Okay, slide that on so it's like that. So that has set the actual distance, because that is so important. So I've set the distance. That's why this this loop tire is so good for this, because it just measures the loop, so the same, you know, everyone's going to be the same sort of size. Okay, and what I do then is slide that bottom one off like that, and then I pull the knot tight. Always wet your knots. I'll just like that, and you want to set that so it's a loop, and just make sure there's no rush. The last thing you want is that knot to come off. If you suddenly start catching fish and that knot undoes itself on a fish, or as you're netting it, or as you're netting the fish, or as the fish is thrashing around in your net, the last thing you want is that to slip or fail, because then you've got to take time out to put a fresh hook length on, and it just slows you down, and that's the last thing you want. Okay, so I've held that under pressure, and that just sets the knot. Okay, so that's finished, so I can slide that off like that. So as you can see, the bayonet is within the loop. Now all I'm going to do now is trim that off, and that's what we're left with. Okay, so you've got the bayonet within a loop. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to thread the hook on, and the very important bit is thread it through the back of the hook. Alright, not the front, the back. So we're going to thread that end through the eye and pull it through so that it goes through to your bayonet. Okay, now what we want to do now is we want to position the bayonet at the right distance from the bottom of the hook. Now for me, I think about 1 to 2mm is enough. I don't like it any more than 2mm. Alright, so you'll see what that looks like in a moment when I've done it. Alright, so I position it so it's going to be about there. So I think that's about the right distance for this particular hook that I'm tying, and I just lay that there. What I'm going to do is you trap the bayonet and the hook in that position so that you can let go, and it just leaves this end free. And what I'm going to do now is wrap this line around the shank of the hook. Okay, now this is thicker line than normal, so it's going to look a lot bulkier, and just start wrapping it round and working your way down the shank of the hook. Alright, and like I said, this is a much thicker line than I've ever used before, so it's going to look a lot bulkier. keeping the line tight, and what I want to do is I want to whip it so that it's going right down to the bend of the hook. Okay, so I'm going to keep wrapping that round, and when you get to that sort of distance, just give it a little bit of a shove just to compact it more, and then you can wrap around again, and I'm going to wrap it to about there. And as you can see, that goes right the way down the actual shank of the hook. And then what I'm going to do then is get the end of the line again, the other end, and thread it again through the back of the hook, back through, and then pull tight. And as you're pulling it through, you'll get to that bit there, and what you want to do is wet it. Always wet it, always wet your knots. Okay, and then I'm just going to pull that tight now. There we go. So what you've got there is, I'm sure it's some form of a knotless knot, so there's no actual knot there other than the knot that you put in to contain the bayonet. Okay, but as you can see now, so the advantages you've got there is that the whippings go right down the hook, so they're going to hold the bayonet in that one position there, right at the base of on the bend of the hook. So you don't need any sort of little sleeve on there. Some of the ready tied hook lengths that you see, and some people use sleeves to actually hold the line against the shank of the hook. Well, that's great, that works fine, but one, they do move. So every time you net a fish or every time you reel in, you might have to slide it back down to the bend of the hook because they will move. And what I've had on several occasions over the past is I've actually known that sleeve to split. And if it splits, it means your hair's not working right, so then you've got to take it off and put another one on. This is just a lot more robust and durable way of doing it. So as you can see, that's the finished hair. Okay, and the advantages to this, again, like I say, there's three advantages to this. One is it's always going to present the bayonet right on the bend of the hook, which is where you want it. Because it's within a loop, as you can see, look how easy that's moving. So that means your wafter is going to waft, because that's ultimately what you want. Okay, and the other thing is, which you've probably spotted already, is that it's in-turned. Just look how it turns in. And that is exactly what you need to help the fish hook themselves, because the hook is constantly turning into the fish's mouth. So when that's sucked in, that is obviously, it's pointing inwards, so there's a massive chance that, you know, even if the fish tries to eject the bait, that hook is going to get pulled into its mouth. Alright, and a lot of people can't tie hooks that way, and that's why some of them use some of the Sertal type hooks, like the QM1s and that sort of thing. Whereas if you do it like this, you've got a hook that's much more open, so there's more chance of the hook actually going into the fish. But because it's turned in as well, because of the way that you've tied it, there's a massive chance that it's going to just hook itself. So that's the way that I do it. The only alternative to that would be I wouldn't have a bayonet on there. I'd have it could be a bait band, or it could be like a speed stop or something like that. But through trial and error, I watched loads of videos about how to do these on the internet. That's what I did through lockdown. I made it a major part of my fishing, and that's something that it's just been massive to my fishing. And when I have caught fish and caught fish in numbers, I haven't had to replace them. There's nothing there for it to go wrong, because it's so durable, because it's so robust. The knot isn't going to move. The black sleeve that comes on some hooks doesn't rip because there isn't one there. That can't fail on you. And it just means, because it's whipped that way, it means that the hook bait is presented right on the bend of the hook, exactly where you need it every single time. So I hope you appreciate that bit of an insight into this. This is something that, it's not something that I would normally broadcast. I've probably shown it one or two people on coaching days, but this is only something that, through a lot of trial and error, through tank tests, through trying lots of different hooks, different lines, different knots and things, and researching online, this has been the best one that I've found, and it's one that I've used ever since we came out of lockdown. And I've obviously won at least 2 or 3 matches now with carp, fishing with hair rigs. I haven't had reason to change it. I haven't had any fail on me, and they've been really, really durable as well, even on some of the really hard fighting big fish. So that's been a huge success, a huge plus that came out of lockdown for me personally. So if anyone's got any queries or questions about this particular rig, I know it's something that it's kind of a personal thing. Lots of people tie their own and might have a different way of doing it, but this is the way that works for me. and it's not something that I broadcast everywhere, but it's something that's had a massive impact on my fishing. So if anyone's got any comments or queries about this, please comment below or get in touch. But I hope you've just enjoyed this little bit of an insight.